Hello student, welcome to EPG Pathsala. I am Dr. Ajit Jaswal from Department of Anthropology, Pondicherry Central University, Puducherry. Today we are going to discuss about a module titled Concept of Race, Ethnicity and Population. Three different concepts under paper Physical and Biological Anthropology. In these modules, we are going to study about the history behind the emergence of concept of race. What are the basis of classifying world population? How the concept of race change in due course of time, and what are the definition of race that came up at different time points. We also try to highlight what is racism. Before going to discuss about all this objectivable point, let me give you a very simple idea or generalized idea related to race, or we can say that what is the concept of race. There exist a wide differences in both physical and cultural characteristics among the people of the world. So we will find there is a cultural differences also there is a physical differences is there also there, and we can see the clear cut demarcation, we call it as a cultural physical characteristic variation. Physically, the human being groups, they differ from each other in skin color. Some are white, some are black, some are brown. Some means we will find the different pattern of skin. Stature, some are very tall, some are very short, some are in between. There is a range of stature that we have seen. We can also see the differences in the form of hairs. Some are having a curly hair, long hair, black hair, thick hair, thin. So many variation. We can see the structure, this variation in the hair, in the texture, in the color, in the form, in the nose. Even we can see the variation in the nose and head, the eyebrow, lips, and so on. Many features, many physical differences that we can see. Even in the lips also. We also have a vision that they are culturally, they differ in aspect of language. Many people, different linguistic groups are there. Food habit, dress pattern, behavior, and so on. So we have a physical differences based on physical feature. We have a cultural differences also. So physical or biological anthropology, they try to attempt to understand this especially physical variation and its reason, important concept, underlying principle. The interest of studying human physical variation, this can be traced in the writing of some of the earlier historians and philosophers. They have given a ample amount of evidence or information regarding the physical variation, like Herodotus. The duration is about 484 to 425 BC. Hippocrates from 460 to 377 BC, and Aristotle. The duration is about 384 to 322 BC. Each of these scholars, they attributed this variation to environmental factor. According to them, environmental factor is also one of the reasons that provide differences or physical variations among human beings. For example, while explaining the reason behind the Egyptian thinker's skull compared to that of the Persian, Herodotus stated that the Egyptian, the heads of their children and left them to headless in the sun, while the Persian covers the heads of their children. Similarly, Hippocrates suggested man with the pathetic physique, that is long and thin, are susceptible to tuberculosis, and those with apoleptic physique, that is short and thick, are predisposed to vascular system. The figure, you can clearly see the voice of exploration, indicating the route as well as different informations which explain the voice of exploration. Historical background or historical backdrop. The era of exploration, that is during 15th, 16th and even 17th century, it marks the discoveries of many new lands and people. For example, in the year 1492, Christopher Columbus discovered the New World and the American Indians of that place. Following these discoveries, people of America, Africa, Asia Pacific region became known to the world. These peoples were classified along with the European into broad racial categories on the basis of physical characteristics. So, discovering of new landmass, it gave a new shape, mostly by the European explorer. The human group residing in this newly discovered place appeared to be physically and culturally different from the Europeans. Based on these differences, attempt to categorize human group into different categories started. This figure shows the broad racial categories given by Blumenbach, a German scientist who first classified the world population into 5 varieties primarily on the basis of skin color, like Caucasian or white, that is the people of Europe, West Asia, Central Asia, and so on. Next one, the Mongolian or yellow race, occupying Tartary, Chinese, and Japanese, and so on. Third one, the Ethiopian or black race, they occupying most of Africa except the north. Next one, Australia, New Guinea, and other Pacific island. Next one, the Americans are the red race. And the last one, the Malayan or the brown race, which occupies the island of the Indian archipelago. Typological mode. From 18th century onward, anthropologists became interested to study human physical variation, and on the basis of that, various attempts were made to classify the world population into different categories called race. Prior to World War II, most studies of human variations focused on racial differences or phenotypic variation that are readily observable, such as skin color, hair form, body build, and stature between large geographically defined population. The criteria that were used to classify the world populations are some observable. Example, skin color, hair form, and nose form. Metric one like stature, and other biological characteristics like blood groups and blood enzymes. For example, Blumenbach, a German scientist who first classified the world population into 5 varieties primarily on the basis of skin color that we have already discussed earlier. Now let's discuss about Blumenbach classification. Caucasian or white, that is people of Europe, West Asia, Central Asia, and so on. Next one is the Mongolian or yellow race occupying the Chinese, Japanese region, and so on. Third one group is Ethiopian or black race occupying most of Africa, Australia, New Guinea, and other Pacific islands. Fourth one is red race, that is called American, comprising of Indians of North and South America. And the fifth one is the Malaya or brown race, which occupies the island of the Indian archipelago. In course of time, more and more people, characteristics, and new methods were employed in classifying human races, as a result of which more number of races and sub-races were distinguished. Thus, in 1889, Dannecker proposed to divide the humanity into 29 races according to hair form with nose form and skin color as secondary traits. Later, scholars like Dixon, Haddon, and Houghton, they use metric or quantitative traits like stature, cephalic index, and nasal index along with observable traits in classifying the world population into various groups. Each of these attempts to divide humankind differed in choosing the criteria of classification as well as in the number of categories and subcategories. If you take a casual survey of the classification undertaken on human population so far, no less than 14 different racial typologies would appear in your list. Most of them started with the major racial stock mentioned by Linnaeus and Blumenbach, which they subdivide further into several subgroups. Now let's discuss about the populational model. Human history records many contact between people from all areas of the world. The basic reason behind the people migration or invasion, that is, people either coming from outside world or they are going to the outside world. This led to the interbreeding, that is interbreeding between the people of outside world with the local people, or people from the local to the outside among different population groups. On the basis of this paradigm or mixing or interbreeding, an outstanding development of the 20th century had been the replacement of a typological thinking with the populationist approach that take into account the range of variability of our species and avoid a simple reliance on average means. Population model of race is based on the premises of evolutionary principle to study human variation. The model conceives that people whose ancestors have more or less exclusively mated with each other over a longer period of time, this will show great similarity with each other. Because the member of the breeding population could be expected to share many genetically interbreeded traits and to have a similar appearance. So, interbreeding play a very important role. The concept of geographical race and local race emerge from this thing. See, intermixing geographical race and local race, from this it come into existence. Gahn divided the world population into 9 geographical races based on this. Here once again he want to highlight the concept of geographical race and local races. So he developed he divided the population of the world into 9 geographical races. Later on Kuhn and Gahn and even the Britzel made a finer subdivision of 30 local races. So there is a 9 geographical races and 30 local races, which Gahn modified to 32, and Dobzhansky modified this into 34 races. A local race is a breeding population adapted to local selection pressure and maintained by either natural or social barrier to gene interchange. Gahn's classification of geographic race, 1961. According to this classification, they divided the classification into American Indians or Amerindians and pre-Columbian population of America, like Polynesians. Polynesian is required, means in the pre-Columbian population it includes island dweller of Eastern Pacific from New Zealand to Hawaii and Eastern Island. Whereas in the case of Micronesian, it is the island dweller of Western Pacific from Guam to Marshall and Gibraltar Island. Then in Melanesian Papuan, it includes the people of Western Pacific Island from New Guinea to New Caledonia and Fiji. Australian, it includes Australian Aboriginal population. Asiatic, in the pre-Columbian population of America, it includes Indonesia to Southeast Asia to Tibet to China to Japan, Japan, Mongolia, and the native tribes of Siberia. Indian, it includes the population of Indian subcontinent. European, it includes the people of Europe, the Middle East, and the African north of Sahara. African, it includes the people of Africa south of Sahara. So in the case of European, it include the area of the part of Africa north of Sahara, whereas in the case of African, it includes the people south of Sahara. Definitions of race. Some definition on races that came up in the mid of 20th century were viewed from an evolutionary perspective and with an assumption about the role of geographic distribution in race formation, and second on the importance of breeding population in forming a collection of traits which set the group apart. Scholars such as Hutton, Dobzhansky and Gahn in their definition have explicitly mentioned that these breeding on Mendelian population can changes in time and are not like watertight compartment. Hutton defined race as a group whose members present individually identical combination of specific physical characters that they owe to their common descent. Dobzhansky said races are defined by population differing in the incidence of certain genes, but actually exchanging or potentially able to exchange genes across whatever boundaries, usually geographic, separating them. He further added that race differences are objectively ascertainable fact. The number of races who choose to recognize is a matter of convenience. Boyd defined race as a population which differs significantly from other human populations in regard to frequency of one or more of the genes it possesses. It is an arbitrary matter which and how many genes loci we choose to consider as a significant constellation. Some even define race as population which can be readily distinguished from another of a genetic ground alone. Meyer defined race in terms of subspecies, saying a subspecies is an aggregate of local population of a species inhabiting a geographic subdivision of the range of a subspecies and differing taxonomically from other populations of a species. Bruce defined race as a division of species which differ from other divisions by the frequency with which certain hereditary traits appear among its members. The above definitions may show subtle differences, but at the same time, the differences or definition exhibit certain commonalities in them, like the role of geographic distribution in race formation and sharing of genetic traits among people who are related to each other through common ancestry, that is, breeding population. Let's try to find out the answer of this particular question. But do these breeding isolates really exist at the moment? Clinical model. By the time of 1950s, scholars were able to generate a large genetic data base of human population distributed across the world. This made clear that a clinical model would more accurately reflect the true nature of human biological variation. This is the first model which did not attempt to compartmentalize human population into distinct groups. It says that closer the spatial distance between the human group, the chances of mating with the neighboring group increases compared to the one who are distinctly placed. Thus, the people whose ancestors have lived close to ours for many generations are most likely to share genetically inherited traits with us than are people who lived further away. Further, the model states that genetically inherited traits most often gradually change in frequency from one geographical area to another. Thus, one can find different frequency zones or clines for a particular genetic traits. For instance, the allele of type B blood generally increases in frequency from west to east in Europe, that we will see in the coming picture. Thus, there is no compartmentalization of humanity as found in previous two models. See the figure. The figure shows the percentage of population that has the B allele. As we have already discussed that the frequency of B blood cell allele generally increases from Southeast and Northeast Asia to Central Asia. Within this more or less continuous cline, there are isolated pockets of relatively low B allele frequency. Therefore, the distribution of these genetically inherited traits appears to be mostly clinical or clinal, but in part it is a discontinuous. Over the past few decades, an increasing number of scientists have challenged the position that race and ethnicity are genetically meaningless. So, while describing the Clinal model and try to find out the question related to breeding isolates reality, whether it is really exist or not, and trying to give the example of B frequency of B blood cell allele, it can be concluded that over the past few decades, there is an increasing number of scientists and they have challenged the position that race and ethnicity are genetically meaningless. So we can clearly say that this complete past few experience and number of new researches or inculcation of new scientific ideas, for them the concept of race or the position of race or the ethnicity value or a concept of ethnicity, in the genetical concept it has no meaning and therefore they are called as genetically meaningless. Richard Lewontin argued that the majority of human genetic variation occurred within a given population opposed to between populations. This means, first, between groups genetic variations represent little of the total genetic variation between any two individuals. Second, racial categories correspond poorly to underlying pattern of human genetics diversity. The concept challenges the biological validity of racial categories. The observation made by Lewontin was later endorsed through the finding of Human Genome Project that reveal all human beings, regardless of race, are more than 99.9% the same. The sequencing of human genome, that is the full set of nuclear DNA, help to estimate how often two individuals differ at a specific site in their DNA sequences. That is, whether they have a different nucleotide base pair at a specific location in their DNA. Geographical location, linguistic affinity or social proximity or endogamy reveals how close we are with our neighboring groups. Molecular diversity. It is believed that anatomically modern humans have migrated from Africa to other part of the world around 100,000 years. In course of movement from one part of the world to the other, human has left a distinct signature in their DNA. The continued gene flow among population, the reduced genetic differentiation among geographically distributed human population, unlike other mammalian species. So, anatomically, modern women have migrated from Africa. This spread has left a distinct signature in our DNA, and the continuous gene flow among population, it has resulted in less genetic differentiation among geographically distributed human population than is observed in many other mammalian species. Thus, at one point of time, all the member of our species were similar. So, we will find all are more or less seems to be similar in physical and social and behavior. That's at one point of view, externally we can see that. But with time, ethnic differentiation took place. Subsequently, through a series of demographic expansion, it may be because of number of changes, fertility, mortality, migration, and so on, and geographic dispersal, migrations, any other, because of number of regions they move, come out, go outside, and social grouping. For example, the genetic diversity of indigenous human population drops with increasing geographic distance from Eastern Africa. So, one would expect this pattern if group of migration moving away from Africa and carried with them just part of the genetic variation existing in Africa. Consistent with this picture, if you think in such a manner, the broad pattern of genetic variation found outside Africa because of the interbreeding, because of their mixing, because of their moving, coming out of they are altogether indulging with the localites, tend to be a subset of those found inside the Africa. Race and ethnic group. The term race, ethnicity and ancestry, it form a network of biological and social connection that link individual and group to each other. This is to say that biological or genetic variation between human groups becomes meaningful if we have an understanding about the historical factors. But the race-based model that correlates some combination of allele with behavioral trait is not acceptable. Montague said an ethnic group represents one of the number of population comprising the single species, that is Homo sapiens, which individually maintain their differences, that is physical and cultural, by means of isolating mechanisms such as geographic isolation and social barrier. These differences will vary as the power of the geographic and social barriers acting upon the original genetic differences vary. The work of Frederick Barth in the 1970s emphasized that members of one ethnic group distinguished themselves from the member of other ethnic group on the basis of a presumed common ancestry and shared cultural trait. As a consequence, the member of a particular ethnic group preferred to choose mate the same ethnic group, that is endogamy. For example, your inmate family member might have a preference of getting a life partner for you from their own ethnic group. This preference is generally given so that your life partner does not feel alienated from your kin members or vis-a-vis because of a shared linguistic, cultural and religious affinity. The continuous preference towards endogamy might offer a biological entity to a particular ethnic group. However, these ethnic boundaries are not that rigid. An increase in cross-cultural marriages could be a good example. Ethnic boundaries may take in different form: cultural, linguistic, religious and economic and so on. There is one common thing between the concept of race and ethnicity, that is shared common ancestry. Despite this similarity, there are some differences. First of all, race is primarily unitary. You can only have one race, while you can claim multiple ethnic affiliation. You can identify ethnicity as Odia and Indians, but for racial identity, you have to be essentially either black or white. Compared to the concept of ethnic group, race is hierarchical and there is a built-in inequality in power. Some area of the opinion that both ethnicity and race are socially constructed and both are illusory and imagined, but racial categories have had a much more concrete impact on people's life because they have been used to discriminate and to distribute resources unequally and set up different standards for protection under law. How close we are with our neighboring ethnic group, that is ethnic affinities. When people move from one place to another as per human tendency, they try to adapt themselves to the new place. Over time, some of the migrants adopt the local language for better communication and in turn for better living. Thus, language shift is a phenomena where a new language is adopted by a population with virtually no influence on their genetic makeup. Several studies have shown that the ethnic group of India shows striking similarities at DNA level. This corroboration with the hypothesis that a small number of female entered India during the initial process of peopling of India. Later, dispersal of women took place from India to Southeast Asia. Molecular data also reveal that the ancestor of the present Austroasiatic tribal population may have been the most ancient inhabitant of India, and footprints of human movement from to West and Central Asia into India has been traced. Let us take an example from the Siddhis communities. It is believed that the Siddhis were brought to India from Africa by the Portuguese traders between 17th and the 10th century. These peoples were sold to the Nawab and Sultans of India to serve as a soldier and slaves. The member possesses typical African features like dark skin, curly hair, broad nose, and so on. At present, the members of this community are found in the states of Gujarat, Karnataka, and Andhra Pradesh. Molecular evidences confirm the Siddhis show 70% affinities with African and 30% with Indians. It has also been estimated that Siddhis have admixture with the neighboring Indian population for about 200 years ago, which coincides with historical record. Biological diversity is commonly associated with socially established categories, so that biological and cultural characteristics are often identified with one another. Now let's discuss about the concept of racism. Racism is based on the false belief that such factors as intellect and various cultural attributes like values and moralities are inherited along with one's physical characteristic, like just now discussed: skin color, different form, texture, and so on, nose form and hair color, and so on, many physical characteristic features. Such belief are based on the assumption that one group is superior to other based on this physical characteristic. Eugenic movement notion of purity of race and persecution of people are the outcome of racism, or what we call it ratio misconception. In the past, leaders among European American fabricated the cultural or behavioral characteristics associated with each race, linking superior traits with the European and the negative and inferior one to the blacks and Indians. This information we have seen in the American Anthropological Association statement on race on May 1998. As such, anthropologists from both sociocultural and biophysical school have been instrumental in recasting those aspects of traditional Eurocentric ideology which regarded racial group as unalterable subspecies in a new socio-political light. British-born anthropologist, that is Ashley Montague, a student of both French Boas and Ruth Benedict, was among the first scientists to argue against the concept of race. He earned fame in the 1940s by arguing that race was a social construct, a product of perception rather than a biological fact. Montague questioned the scientific validity of human race in his classic work, Man's Most Dangerous Myth, The Fallacy of Race. Montague also opposed anthropologist Carlton Cohn's notions that whites and blacks evolved along separate paths. Protest against racism. Likewise, when Frank Livingstone wrote his chapter on the non-existence of human races in 1964, he criticized the utility of the race concept by explaining genetic variability, arguing that if a population is X percent, that is X percent Negro in one characteristic, it must be X percent in all characteristics for this racial explanation of differences to be an adequate explanation. In fact, a Livingstone explained genetic trait can often be discordant, and if two genes vary discordantly, the race set up on the basis of one do not describe the variability in the order. He further suggested that instead of finding out differences between populations, more legitimate and fruitful approach is to understand pattern of biological variation across species. Such an approach would yield great insight into the adaptive significance of human biological variation, because environmental pattern parameters that drive natural selection vary systematically across geographic race. To go by the word of Jacques Barzun on racial classification, the words are as such: no argument has ever been advanced by any reasonable man against the fact of differences among men. The whole argument is about what differences exist and how they are to be argued. UNESCO on Racism, 1951. Statement on Race, Expert Meeting of the Physical Anthropologist and Genetics, Paris, 1951. Against the backdrop, UNESCO in the year 1951 made a statement on race. The UNESCO statement on race was drafted by a group of scholars from various disciplines like anthropology, geology, genetics, and biometry, and so on. At the very outset of this statement, the anthropologists have made it clear that the concept of race is unanimously regarded by anthropologists as a classificatory device providing a geological framework within which the various group of mankind may be argued. That the use of word race has long been and remain controversial, and the anthropologists have never been comfortable with this topic. Let's try to conclude the whole thing with a very small statement giving a crunch of information of this particular concept. That is, at present the word ethnic group is being used in defining a population. Despite this paradigm shift in the construction of race, the racist view of humanity has not changed. The outcome of this is ethnic violence, warfare, terrorism, and genocide, which pose a threat to community. Okay, student. Now let's we try to summarize some of the important points that we have learned in these modules. We'll try to highlight the conceptual events are the points that we think to be important for us to remember, like classification of human population on the basis of physical behavioral trait started during the 16th and 17th century. Behavioral here means social or cultural. Later, typological model based on the external morphological characteristics became the sole criteria for classification, like skin color, hair, nose form, and so on. Population model replaced typological model based on the premises of evolutionary principle to the study of human variation, means the changes, differences that has occurred either because of migration, because of interbreeding, because of mixing, and maybe environmental also. Clinal model contested the population model. It stated that genetically inherited traits most often gradually changes in frequency from one geographical area to the another. Whereas molecular data provided more precise estimate of human migration and admixture or mixing or interbreeding. Finally, the important point that we have to remember over here is that the concept of ethnic group emerged which distinguished member of one ethnic group from the other on the basis of presumed common ancestry and shared cultural traits. Thank you.